Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to one more session of Coding Night New Zealand. And tonight we have a special guest, Daniel Rowe. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing quite well. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. So for those that, are not aware, like I got to meet Daniel at the Microsoft MVP Summit. In there, like we got to share like a lot of experiences. And I heard like from Daniel about Nuxt. And I was really interested like about this like the framework and the whole I would say like the platform, right, that you have created or contributed with the community. So you're building a better hammer, rebuilding Nuxt from scratch. What you're gonna bring to us?
So exactly, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did, and I don't know if the word rebuilding fills you with terror, but it probably should. We did a lot of big changes, and some of them have proved to be good ones, and some of them have maybe not been so good. But I'll cover a big overview of what we've done and how it fits into our framework's journey, and in case you're interested. And I would love questions, so do fire away with any kind of question or follow-up that you might want.
Nice. Well, thanks, Daniel. So excited. And I guess like for the audience, that's it's going to be like amazing session. Yep. And before like Daniel starts, I just would like to introduce the user group for you. And if you don't know like Coding Nights user group, so we are a community group of developers. We love coding. We follow best practices on software development languages and technologies. In general, we are more focused on Microsoft stack, but we're open to all technologies, right? In front end, back end. And the main goal of the user group is to enable developers with practical knowledge to excel and launch their careers. I'd like to mention that we are part of AzureTire.com, where we're a community group of cloud native enthusiasts, and we get to share like the latest and greatest in the cloud native space. We're also sponsored by .NETfoundation.org, which is an entity that looks after the different open source .NET projects. And we have recently been sponsored by JetBrains, right? The company behind like awesome tools like Rider and other IDEs, right, for developers. With no further ado, Daniel, I'm just gonna share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, hi everyone. So I'm talking about building a better hammer, which is the story of Nuxt 4. So my name is Daniel Rowe. I've been very well introduced. I'm a full-time open source developer, so I have the real privilege of spending my time building cool things, things that I hope will help other people's lives, and which I enjoy building. And so probably the biggest one that maybe people might have heard of is Nuxt itself, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But there are some other projects as well. So one would be for Nitro, for example, which is a framework for building web servers, which actually we built as part of building Nuxt 4, but which can be used by anyone. So it's the foundation of recent meta frameworks like Analog, which is an Angular meta framework, or Solid Start, which is a Solid.js meta framework, and the upcoming TanStack meta framework as well. PageSpeed.dev is a little website that lets you share your core web vitals, and you can easily put that on social media, and you get a nice social image. Regexp.dev, that's a magic regexp is a library to enable people to write regular expressions in a type-safe way. So a deep integration with TypeScript, and it compiles back to normal regular expressions at build time. So you get the benefits with no costs associated. Fontaine is a library for reducing layout shift when you're loading a website with custom web fonts. It uses font metrics to make your native system font look as close as possible to the custom web font. so pure CSS. Elk.zone is a client for Mastodon. Mastodon is a distributed social network, like Twitter, but open. Firstcommit.is will find your first commit on GitHub. And React to Nuxt.com is a new course that I'm just starting, which will help get React developers up to speed with Nuxt itself. And I'm a GDE and an MVP. And this is what I see right now, except for the cat who is locked out. But this is my view, and basically, this my cat Barley will often stop me from doing development. I'm sure, I don't know if you've encountered similar kinds of things, but yes, she's a very sweet and she very much needs her attention. I think the sort of personality of a spoiled teenager is the thing I think that she's going for. I live in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and where I just moved actually in January, and so I'm in a city with other developers, which is a real delight. For the first time in quite a few years, I was in the middle of the countryside for a bit, and so yeah, I'm really pleased to be around other folk. So if you're ever coming here, if you're ever in Edinburgh, give me a shout, look me up. Be nice to say hi. And yes, so I have a question for you. And this might be a bit tricky given that we're screen sharing, but if you can scan a QR code and tell me if you've used Nuxt before, I would love to know. And very much hoping that the sort of network works for us in this particular way. Anyone having any difficulty scanning that?
I'd like to do it, but my camera is my phone.
Probably. I can actually give you some URL. Oh, someone's managed it. I can give
Oh,
you
yeah. Yep.
equivalent URL. So you could go to row.dev /v/yes or /not yet. So row.dev /v/yes or /not -yet, which should give you. Okay, we have one person who has not yet used Nuxt, and I'm sorry to sort of ask. But it's good to know, and you'll also see exactly how clever I am, because I have not just put yes and no, I've put yes and not yet. So subliminally, already you'll be thinking, maybe I'll use Nuxt, and I would love it if you tried it out at some point. But thank you so much. Well, it may be that the tech isn't here with us, but no worries. It's good to know that there aren't folk who are really familiar with Nuxt. So for I guess all of us, what is Nuxt? Well, it's a progressive framework built on Vue and Nitro. So Vue is the JavaScript library in charge of rendering, making it interactive on the client side, and Nitro being the full stack, the framework for building full stack web apps that I was talking about a few minutes ago. The idea is that it requires no upfront effort as a developer. So you can get started straight away. You can start building a website. And there's a huge focus on developer experience in terms of optimizing for what it's like to use as a developer. And the idea is very much that we aim to build best practices into it. But allow it to be fully configurable. So the balance between those things is always tricky, and so we're very much leaning on the developer experience side, making things straightforward and simple. And there are a few reasons why we do that, which I think matter a lot to us. Different frameworks might pick different options for good reasons. Our history is that there was a framework for React called Next.js, which was basically around the same time as Nuxt was created. And Nuxt has always aimed to be, or at least from the beginning, aimed to be a sort of equivalent of that for Vue. So back in the day, I don't know if any of you have had the pain of crafting your own Webpack configuration, for example. So I think both in a way, Nuxt and Next started from the pain of managing a Webpack configuration and sort of setting up the build tooling. So Nuxt was created to make it easier to get going with a full stack server rendered Vue application. And version 1 was released back in 2018. And then version 2 later that year. And then Nuxt continued to develop, but Vue 2 carried on. And then we started, so version 3 of Vue was a massive breaking change, a huge, I say a breaking change. It was a huge change for the ecosystem, and it broke a lot of things about the ecosystem which relied on Vue 2. Vue 2 to Vue 3 was a big change. It was a very significant upgrade in terms of extensibility, but it meant that there were a lot of things that had to change and update, among them Nuxt. And we were in an interesting position because we not only had Vue with a major update, but Webpack 5 was released, which was a major upgrade. Post CSS 8 was released. And we thought it would be a good idea to rewrite Nuxt, to actually go back and fix some of the things that we could have done right the first time round. So, for example, we wanted to rewrite it in TypeScript to have better types sort of built in from the ground. We wanted to rethink the server piece of the puzzle, like what could a web server be if we designed it for the modern web, and that, you can see, took quite a lot of time. And halfway through the process of rebuilding it, we also Vite was released. Vite is a bundler, a development tool that Evan, who also created Vue, created. And it swept the web development, the JavaScript community, particularly by storm. And we also wanted to add support for that. So Nuxt 3 ended up supporting not just Vite, but not just Webpack, but Vite as well. And so you see that there's a huge gap here then between the release of version 2 and version 3, particularly if you compare it with version 1. So 1 and 2 were released in the same year, and then it was a solid 4 years before we had version 3, and a solid two or so years after we started work on version 3. And I've called this Nuxt. I've said this talk is about Nuxt 4 because we're releasing Nuxt 4 very soon. In June, we're aiming for next month, and really in maybe about 2 or 3 weeks. So we've learned a few things in that journey, and so I want to talk a little bit about those things and what we're aiming to do and what we've hopefully got better at since we started version 3. So this is some data on Nuxt. So we currently have 52.4 thousand stars on GitHub, about 30 million downloads a month, and 63% of people are using Nuxt 3 versus Nuxt 2. And those numbers are nice. I'm glad to see them going up. But honestly, what I'm more excited about is this slide. So these are some of the contributors to Nuxt. So we have over 710 contributors who have helped make Nuxt what it is. Nuxt is a community framework. It's not backed by a big VC-backed company or anything like that. It's built by individuals who want to make it a cool tool to build sites with, and that's how I got started. For example, in open source, it's something I was using and enjoyed helping out with, helping people with, and still the people who build Nuxt are doing so because they love doing that, because they want to help other people, and it is really a delight to be part of that community.
Nice.
So in terms of what Nuxt is and is about, we have very much a philosophy of developer experience, and I mentioned that at the beginning. And one of the ways we promote good developer experience is we have the concept of convention over configuration. So very much out of the box, things are zero config. They're designed to be one particular way that we think is best practice. And one of the reasons for that is that it helps reduce cognitive load. And I mean, I think this is relevant for any library and any design of library. And I think this might be particularly true in the Angular community as well, because if you're moving from one project to another project, and you don't have to think like, how is this going to be set up? What are the options going to be for this project? The many different possibilities how it might be configured. But you're pretty sure that to start with, you have a solid set of baseline expectation of what it's going to look like. So the directories are going to look a little bit like this. The components are going to be written a little bit like that. And it really decreases the work you have to do to transition mentally from one to another. And I think that's true in general. So I think it explains, for example, the immense popularity that Tailwind CSS has had. So apart from any kind of question about which you might have about the right way to emit CSS or style a website, one of the things that Tailwind does is it provides this very, very common base of what it looks like to style CSS and how to write classes for that CSS. So you can basically take somebody from a project, put them into another one, and as long as both projects use Tailwind CSS, they can almost start styling their website from hour zero, which is an incredible thing when you think about it. It really, really reduces friction, and that's one of the things we're aiming to do with Nuxt, although not on the CSS front, but on the framework point of view. I think about things like routing and plugin, like how you run code at your application start, how you run code when you're transitioning from one page to another page, for example. And one thing, of course, that we're not doing is we're not trying to take over the world. So I like from my point of view, Nuxt, and I talk about it in terms of building a better hammer, which you might think of as I want Nuxt to be more and more useful in more and more situations, so people can think about using it for anything from a small personal website to a huge enterprise app. But that is not about sort of winning a mind share or framework battle. It's being useful to people. And I really think one of the things that I like about, I guess it's probably not true in every community, but one of the things that I really like about the Vite, the Nuxt community, and plenty of others as well, is the idea of collaboration and working well together, helping each other, even if you're not using the same, even if you're not using Vue or React or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. We're all tool users, and we are makers. We're like carpenters. We're sort of making things in the web space. And the tools we use are, in some ways, the least important part of that. We obviously want to make them better, but they're not the kind of thing that separates us. That we're united by so many more important things. So just want to be super, super clear that obviously it's nice to see usage numbers going up and things like that, but it's by no means the most important thing. So we want to see Nuxt be I want to see Nuxt be a better tool, a better hammer, basically to help people, not to try and win some kind of framework statistics game, which I guess probably goes without saying, but I still wanted to say it. So in our move to Nuxt 3, mistakes were made, although I think I might put that a little bit differently. We got some things wrong. And I think the first and most obvious thing that you can see that we got wrong is just really, really obvious in the timeline, right? So we took far too long to release something that people could use. And one of the reasons I think for that was that we were afraid of the version number. And we thought we've got this one shot to make a major change. And Vue had version 1, version 2, version 3 was there now, and we were sort of mirroring that. And I think that held us back personally. But we definitely made a big mistake in waiting too long to release something that people could play with. So actually, if we change it a little bit around again, not from things we got wrong, but things we learned, here are a couple that I think maybe I would point out. So one is that scope and time are not both fixed, or can't necessarily both be fixed. So if you have an ambitious scope and you want to achieve a lot, you might have to flex on your time in terms of delivering that. Or if you have a fixed time, then your scope has to be flexible, because what if you don't achieve it? You're still, which one are you going to be committed to? Are you going to release it without all of the changes that you hoped to make? And so one of the things that that I said at the beginning of 2023, when I started leading the Nuxt core team, was that we would be committed to a time-based release cycle. So we would release about one patch every week, about one minor release with new features every month, and about one major release every year. So moving away from the idea of what we had before with a version 3 release was basically a very ambitious scope and therefore an ever increasing time runway, where we took longer and longer and longer as we wanted to make sure we got it right, which in lots of ways make sense, but it was very frustrating for users who were waiting for that to come out, and in some ways were dependent on it from coming out. So we now have this sort of reliable release cycle where people know what's happening. If a bug gets fixed, they know they're going to get a bug fix relatively soon, in a week or two. We have a sort of commitment to new major releases, which is why Nuxt 4 is coming out. It's not that there have been so many changes that we need to make a new major. It's more that we don't want to bunch them up and take too long. We also learned the importance of ecosystem. So Nuxt, one of the things that makes Nuxt is actually a really vibrant modules ecosystem, and lots of downstream projects and packages that depend on it. And it wasn't just a case of, could we release Nuxt 3? Could we release a new major version? But actually, how do you work with all of the packages that exist alongside it in order to make sure that the upgrade path for the entire ecosystem was a workable one? And we didn't necessarily get that right at the time. And there are things that we are now doing that help make that better. And I'll talk a little bit about them as well, because I think they're relevant for any community or framework. We also, in Nuxt 2, very much had reliance on how Nuxt worked internally. So we exposed a lot of Nuxt, which was how people could then customize it, which is a core value for us. But the problem was, when we rewrote the internals of Nuxt itself, all of that stopped working. So the hooks that people were hooking into were no longer called. The server wasn't running in exactly the same way. Modules weren't running at runtime. They were only running at build time. There were a lot of changes like that really were problematic for people building on top of Nuxt. And in a lot of ways, because we were making all these changes and because it took so long, we were in a way repairing a moving car. We swapped out Webpack for Vite, for example, halfway along the track. We rewrote lots and lots, and we didn't just do it once, but more than once. So it was probably very much the wrong way to do things. Although, we got there in the end, and I'm very happy with where we got to. So some of the things then that we were able to do is, so some of the ways that Nuxt is able to work and able to make people hook into things. For example, we have a utility that we extracted as part of the Nuxt 3 process called Hookable. Now, actually, you'll see this un.js GitHub org throughout my slides. Un.js was a GitHub organization that was created during the time we were building Nuxt 3, created by Puya Parsa, who was the previous Nuxt core team lead. And more and more, the vision of un.js is to create unified, universal JavaScript tools. So things that we use to build Nuxt, for example, but which are not Nuxt specific. And this really goes back to what I was saying before about our philosophy and how we want to go forward. We don't just want to be building Nuxt. or growing the Nuxt empire, we want to be working in collaboration with people building all kinds of different things, whatever they're building. So these tools can be used on their own. They can be used in different meta frameworks, and they can be used in Nuxt, obviously. And the idea is that this makes them better, more resilient, and stronger. So we can fix bugs, add new features, and everyone benefits from them, not just Nuxt itself. Some of these tools were internal to Nuxt before. Some of them we had previously released as separate libraries. Hookable actually was a separate library. And one of the things Hookable lets you do is it allows you to have a complex life cycle that's not necessarily straightforward, but allows you to register code to run at different points in that life cycle, which means that module authors, so people who want to extend Nuxt, can actually deeply integrate with lots of different parts of Nuxt and Nitro. We worked with the Google team to the Chrome team to make to allow automatic integration with console create task. So even in asynchronous stack traces, you can preserve the history and the stack trace of events. So running in hookable hooks, for example. And it provides support for lots of different task runners. So different strategies, like do you run a task, wait for it to finish, and then go to the next one? Or do you run lots of them in parallel? Or do you want to have some other kind of strategy? And you can basically provide your own. And in Nuxt, because this was very much a under the hood kind of thing, we now expose that by providing in our dev tools. So when you're developing your project, you can actually just pull up a panel in the web page and see this. You can actually see the hooks that are running and the order in which they're running, how many things are registered to those hooks, and so on, which can be incredibly helpful for understanding what's going on under the hood. We've also done another thing in order to help make Nuxt a better hammer. So we've made it pluggable, with the idea that core utilities and components can be swapped out for other ones. So for example, and this was driven by the fact that Vite was released halfway through the creation of Nuxt 3, the bundler itself is swappable. So you can use Vite, you can use Webpack, and we are working on getting RSPack support ready to go. It's nearly there. And the idea is if another bundler is released, we should be able to build Nuxt with that as well. Because as much as possible, we want to make it possible to hot swap things in and out. There are even core Nuxt code, like the SEO metadata piece, or the routing piece of a picture, or how our components are registered, or how other utilities, like we have an auto import system. Excuse me. How all of these things are done is actually done in a way that can be swapped out. So they can be, different things can be plugged in. And the actual architecture of an end Nuxt project is also hot swappable. So people can build different layers of their application and actually combine them at build time. So you can take one application that I don't know, looks after the admin panel of the site, another that looks after the checkout menu, another which is just a component library. And you can just register all of these as different layers of your app. And then at build time, they can be pulled together. And that's enabled by the fact that so much about Nuxt is pluggable, that there is this sort of glue layer that looks for, at build time, pulls different things together and actually makes them one coherent whole. It's also modular. So I mentioned Nuxt modules, and there's actually a website you can go to, nuxt.com/modules, and you'll see a lot of them. Nuxt modules are distributable, you see. So you can build them like in the code of your project, in which case they're obviously not distributed anywhere. You can build them in an internal registry, or you can even publish them to NPM, so just as a normal library. And if you want to, you can add them to the modules dataset on nuxt.com on nuxt/modules, which is a public repo, and then you'll then get access to information about them from an API. And we also are able to do other things with those modules to ensure that they stay up to date. For example, we publish tooling, Nuxt module builder, which allows sort of rolling out bug fixes and increasing consistency across the modules ecosystem. And in general, we have a lot of different things, a lot of different modules using that. We also, because of what we learned about Nuxt internals and the idea of over-reliance on those internals, we built a composable Nuxt SDK, so something called Nuxt Kit, which module authors can use, as well as people building Nuxt apps. And the idea is it's effectively a layer between Nuxt itself and the intent, the things that you might want to do. So, for example, you might want to add a route in an app to handle a particular incoming request. So you can do that not with some sort of specific hook, but you can actually just run a utility, add server route, which is semantic, and we can update the implementation as Nuxt changes, if it changes, to reduce that friction point for authors and reduce breaking changes actually in future. So some of the stats, we have over 215 modules, over 180 maintainers, lots of contributors and stars and downloads. It's amazing actually to see some of the things people build on top of Nuxt. So everything from different CMSs to different authentication providers to really quite advanced stuff like TypeScript code gen based on APIs. And check it out, Nuxt.com modules. There's lots and lots of amazing stuff there. And you can actually pull down the stats yourself from our API, which is powered by the fact that there is that public data set. So one of the things that we believe in quite strongly, not just making Nuxt pluggable, not just making it modular, not just making it hookable, but we really care a lot about prioritizing user choice. And I hope that came across in the beginning when I talked about the fact that we started with zero config, but that we let people take full control. Because I think choice is a very high value. And I think the opposite of that is lock-in. So from my point of view, the idea that people are stuck and might at some point find that they can't change something or can't do something they need to do. So, for example, across the different things that we offer, the different pieces of Nuxt, we have hot swappable implementations for lots of different things. So in our built-in font solution, we have actually even more than that. We have 6 different possible providers. We have over 20, maybe even 30 different image providers, image CDN providers. We have different database providers, KV storage providers. We support different story approaches to testing your site, or different test runners, or different ways of deploying your site in zero config to different platforms. And that's something we invest quite hard in. Obviously, we can't do it all on our own, but that's, again, a benefit because we are a community project. So it's not like Puya and I and the rest of the core team are doing this all on our own. Far from it. These things are maintained by people in the community who use these different providers. And it means we're able to prioritize user choice while also making sure we are up to date with the breadth of what there is. And actually, if any of this doesn't work, or if you have a need that isn't met, in almost every case where we support different providers, we support custom providers. So you can create your own and actually do whatever you want or whatever you need. So you can create your own image CDN provider. I did that in a talk recently in order to integrate with some recipe API that provided their own image transformation endpoint. And as much as possible, we want to make that the reality for Nuxt, so users can pick and choose what they want. So there's the sort of strong backbone, the convention over configuration piece, but there is at the same time total flexibility in terms of what people can choose and end up doing at the end of the day. This is over 90 providers on this particular slide, and I think probably even more now. Looking to version 4, so obviously version 2 to 3 was a massive, painful change, and a lot of people are burnt by it and feel pretty much like they're really worried about upcoming major releases. So we have we've adopted a couple of practices that have worked really well for us and might work well for you as well, whatever framework you use. So apart from the release schedule, which I talked about, we also have adopted an ecosystem CI strategy, which originally was created by Dominic on the Vite team, which and has been used by plenty of other projects over the years, but in this particular form comes from the Vite project, which is the idea of a GitHub action, which is able to test the latest commit to our Nuxt repository against a range of other downstream projects to see will it break them if it's released as it is. And this is hugely, hugely helpful for us. So rather than lots and lots of manual quality control before a new release of Nuxt, we're able to run our test suite and not just test internally whether Nuxt and our own tests work, but whether other people's tests work for downstream libraries that are relying on us. And that is really, really helpful. So we know a new Nuxt release isn't going to break any of these projects. And that lets us move quite quickly on a release schedule. So we can then build in quite a lot of new and different things quite quickly without worrying that we're going to be breaking the ecosystem. So we were able to release server components, for example, even deeply reactive server components. They're totally different from a React server component, but they do a similar thing in that they're rendered on the server and they are compatible even with SPA routing. So even if you're navigating with JavaScript on the client side, you can still load individual pieces of that directly from the server. App manifests and build caching. We were the first framework to support the Vue Transitions API. We support automatic reload and state restoration if there are chunk errors, such as from a new deployment. We have 0 JavaScript modes and even 0 Vue runtime modes. And we're working at the moment on multi-app support. And all of this, I think, is really allowed for by the stability that we get from ecosystem CI and our regular releases. Equally, because we want to be able to know that these things are true, we've built a test utils library, working particularly with the vtest ecosystem CI, vtest ecosystem, in order to make sure that we are sort of tracking best practices, collaborating with the ecosystem CI as an org, and we're looking to roll out new features sooner rather than later, so people can opt into them and test them out, give us feedback before we actually end up implementing them fully. So even now in Nuxt 3, so today, if you install the nightly version of Nuxt 3, or if you install the new 3.12 version, which will be coming out pretty soon, you'll be able to test out the breaking changes of Nuxt 4 by opting into them with a feature flag. They'll be opt-in, you can test them out, and again, you can turn them off. And so that kind of future and features namespace ability is a really, really helpful one, we think, in making future upgrades, like the one to version 4, less painful than the one to version 3. I'm also working on a downstream testing action. So people with private code or projects that they don't want to register with our ecosystem CI can test it. We are also working on incremental code migration. I'd like to shout out codemod.com, which they're doing amazing things, and looking at maybe doing something with them, as well as maybe something internal to Nuxt CLI. And if anyone uses Nuxt and builds a library that's dependent on it with tests, I always say that they'd be very, very welcome to submit that test to our ecosystem CI, so we can guarantee that before new Nuxt releases, their library won't be broken. I don't know if you've come across the Web Platform DX work on baseline features, but there are different. There's an idea now with the demise of Internet Explorer that we have a set of web browsers which are upgraded, somewhat evergreen, and so we have an idea of what features we can rely on as web builders. And the baseline proposal works to define what those features are and make it possible for us to know as web developers. And so we have a commitment on the Nuxt end to meet that. So basically to roll out new features when they become available, and also not to rely on those new features until they are widely distributed. And so that's something that we are working on making more explicit and maybe testing officially, but that is something that we are delighted to be a part of. And there's some more things that we're really looking forward to doing. So whether that's built-in WebSocket, sort of cross-platform WebSocket support, look at the cross WS library on JS. There are lots of new possibilities with WebAssembly in the JavaScript space that I'm excited about. New JavaScript runtimes. We're looking at maybe even having the dev server running in different runtime environments to let users build sites that are able to know a bit more about where they're running. And we're collaborating with the Aurora team from Google on improving Nuxt performance and looking to sort of explore new frontiers there. We're then able to monitor things like what features people are using from our telemetry, which is opt-in. So obviously, please enable it. And then we'll be able to see some of these things and know where to put our focus. And HTTP Archive does some great work in crawling the web and pulling information about performance and usage of different features. So we can, for example, track the difference that some of our performance features makes in end user websites, which is really, really helpful for figuring out whether it's the right approach, whether we need to make additional changes or improve things on our end. So what about Nuxt 4? It's coming out in a couple of weeks, and it's actually not about hype. So the strategy that we adopted, the Semver strategy of releasing bug fixes in patches every week, releasing features in about every month, means that there's not a lot for a major release in the form of features. It's actually about thoughtful breaking changes. So figuring out how best to break things and where those things need to be broken. And so if it's only about breaking changes, then one of the major priorities in terms of my focus is figuring out how we can make it as painless as possible for people. So allow people to opt into them early, allow people to opt out of them even after the major version is released. And that's very much my focus. So I hope that the release of Nuxt 4 will basically be almost unnoticed. People will seamlessly upgrade to it and not worry too much about it. The focus on what that migration experience is like is, I think, how I would like it to be judged. So my main aim, I guess, in Nuxt 4 is to reclaim people's confidence that may have been damaged somewhat after the version 3 release. Some of the changes that we are doing, for example, a new default directory structure, which is that way for performance reasons. So we have a top-level app folder. Previously, all of the folders underneath it were just on an equal level. So you would have components, composables alongside modules, public and server. And we think this will be more performant because it lets us run a watcher directly on a directory rather than at the top level. It also helps people understand the difference between the server and the view app parts of their website. And we have opted into more performant defaults throughout the rest of the site. And whenever you change a default, that is a breaking change pretty much, even if it's the right change to make. So we have less reactive payloads for data fetching. So previously, if you did some data fetching, even if that data never changed, it was still deeply watched in case you made any changes to it. Whereas actually a better default is not to do that. And it means that your site immediately becomes more performant. And there's some other features that we're working on too. Thinking about best practice changes, another kind of breaking change that we might want to do. So for example, we pass absolute paths in one of our hooks. It's a breaking change if you're expecting a relative one, but hopefully it's a really, really minor one. And actually, we're able to use the modules database that I talked about. I was then able to open upstream, like in advance PRs against all of the repositories I could find on GitHub that were using this hook to give them a forward and backward compatible change. So it would work with relative paths, it would work with absolute paths, and hopefully get those merged, which means that even before the release of Nuxt 4, we can be pretty confident it won't cause breakage in the modules that have adopted that. So another really huge beneficial point for having an official modules database, as we do. And we've also put the word out in the Nuxt community for people who want to contribute, because again, we are just our community. So we've spent some time on our docs. So we have /support, for example. You can actually go to lots and lots of examples of code throughout the documentation and hover over something and get TypeScript support on the website. So it should make them easier to understand. And Anthony Fu and Sebastian Chopin, who originally created Nuxt, they've been working and doing amazing things there. We have a Discord channel, a Discord server, which is where we do most of our collaboration, as well as on GitHub. And we also have a website, which I built originally and has been significantly improved design-wise, called nuxters.nuxt.com, which will actually give you a role on Discord if you've contributed to Nuxt with a PR or an issue or various different things. And you can actually, anyway, that's a bit of fun. And actually, I make a more general offer, and that's not just for people in the Nuxt community as well. But actually, I have an open diary. So if anyone ever wants to have a 10-minute chat with me, ideally about open source or getting involved in open source in some kind of way, please feel free to book it. Particularly if that's something that you would like to be involved in, but you feel like you don't know where to start, or you don't know whether you would be welcome. I'm really happy to give a perspective as an open source maintainer and answer any questions that you might have, and do anything I can to make your path easier or better. Yeah, be very, very happy to do that. And I guess in general, that's it on my point of view. If you're interested, you can find out more at nuxt.com, or follow Nuxt on Twitter or on Mastodon, or join the Discord server, or you can always contact me. My website is ro.dev. You can find my contact details there. My email is daniel@ro.dev. I'd really be happy to help. I think, like so many people in the open source community, I do what I do because I enjoy it, because I feel it's such a privilege to be able to be part of making people's experience making websites and building things on the web better. So it's a real pleasure. And that's sort of pretty much all from me. So thank you so much for having me. And if anyone has any questions, I would be really delighted to answer them.
Well, I do have a question, but you just presented like on the previous slides. So it's just the contribution, right? I think that's, it's an amazing I would say platform and like a jam stack where you guys have put like a lot of thoughts like in designing the modules, the components, making like a pluggable in decoupling the dependencies, and wow, that's really like a a piece of art, like of engineering, to be honest. And yeah, and I think it's gold, like you're putting like people keen like to contribute and recognizing those contributions, right? Because in general, people contribute because they have specific needs. Something is not really working, or like at least experience I had like with other open source projects. But what you guys are putting there, I think, yeah, wow, that's amazing. That's my feedback just right now, just by looking from like what you guys have put, and also like by exploring the website, right, and seeing like how modular that is. Yeah, I would ask like I know that, well, in UK, like in that must be like really popular. Do you know like the distribution or the usage per region or the different countries of Nuxt?
So Nuxt is, I should know that off the top of my head. Nuxt has a huge, it has a lot more adoption in, even in different countries that are next to each other. It's not necessarily the same. So it can vary very widely. So Europe, there's a large Nuxt adoption, more than in the US, for example, and that's probably
Yeah.
because most of the team building Nuxt are based outside of the US. A large adoption, a lot of people using Nuxt in Asia as well, and I think both of those facts do also mirror the fact that Vue, as a JavaScript UI library, is also distributed much more internationally than something like React, which is much more US
Yeah,
centric to start with, for example.
yeah,
But it really does vary, and you can find people using Nuxt in lots of different parts of the world. But one of the things I am sad about is that there are more there are so many different communities that have their own entirely separate identity and might never even talk to or be aware of other people. So, there might be, like, for example, in Edinburgh, we have a .NET meetup and there's a JavaScript meetup, and we might never
yeah,
talk. And that's always such a shame when you have people who are doing stuff probably involving very similar skills internally or in
yeah,
terms of but actually don't end up talking to each other. Like, I think, anyway, I would love to see a bit more cross-pollination, because there are lots of good ideas people also have solved,
yeah.
which you might never hear about.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I don't see like any questions like from the audience. They're probably gonna raise that up, but yeah, you have like all the contact details from Daniel. I think that's really interesting projects, right? Really for like to be involved and get to learn. Really, I always advise like all developers, like well, if you're starting, to engage with the community, look at technology that you're passionate about it, and if you want to explore like well, Nuxt, Vue, front end technologies, well, that's a really good, well, well, I'd say platform just to be involved, right? And having like being supported as well. I think that's the challenge, because if you're starting, you have like no idea really how to do it. Yeah, I
Mm.
think that's amazing. What you're bringing. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much, Daniel. Really appreciate
Thanks
your
so much for
time,
your
you
kind words.
and you coming and sharing with us. I was really interested to see like, okay, well, what were the challenges that you guys had it, especially like with the breaking changes, right? And you're trying
Yeah,
like to smooth things up, like to opt in, opt out. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome, right? I mentioned like before coming like to the session that well, I use like Jamstacks, like mainly on React, right? I feel that that sort of support to the community that kind of is missing from some Jamstacks, right?
mm,
In general, you want to see features coming to fulfill like particular needs, but it seems like it's really engaging community of contributors that you have. So I'm definitely exploring next on my own personal projects, and why not like your company, right? So I invite like developers to give it a go. Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think like this session is going to be recorded. It's recorded. It's going to be available on Coding Nights YouTube channel. And well, just be in touch, right? And be nice to each other. And we get to talk again the next session in a few weeks. So thank you very much, and see you guys next time.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.